Hello, my name is Joe Fox, and for my senior project, I conducted an experiment to determine whether the radiation from a Tesla coil that anyone might make at home is likely dangerous enough to warrant a warning. To start off, I'll explain what a Tesla coil is. The first Tesla coil was invented by Nikola Tesla in order to send energy through the air wirelessly, creating a network of free energy. But most people who make them now just do it for the fun of it. I chose this for my senior project after a suggestion by a family friend who thought it would be interesting to build a Tesla coil. As this is a school project, I did a research into safety before I submitted my project. In doing so, I read many warnings about high voltage, but nothing about radiation, which I found out Tesla coils do emit. With this in mind, I came up with my experiment to test the effects of radiation of a Tesla coil on fruit flies. I figured it'd be too much paperwork to use human guinea pigs, or regular guinea pigs for that matter. To measure changes, I decided to look at physical deformities that appeared as well as behavioral changes. My project was broken into 4 stages, the first one being the design stage. In this stage, I learned about how a Tesla coil works and found several guides that I then used to make my own. The second stage of this project, the longest one, was the material gathering and construction stage. The basic components of my Tesla coil were my saltwater Leyden jar capacitor array, the primary and secondary coil, the ground, the spark gap, the transformer, and the top load. The capacitor array was built by me. The primary and secondary coil were built with the help of Mr. Moore. The ground my dad helped put in. The spark gap I made. The transformer was bought online, and the top load was made by me. These are the unconnected saltwater Leyden jars. Here you can see a failed attempt to bend my primary coil into shape. Here the saltwater Leyden jars are lined up in an array. However, I changed how they were attached by soldering them together afterwards with Mr. Moore's help. In lieu of the first attempt to make a primary coil failing, I used a soft copper and hand bent the pipes instead. The secondary coil was wound by using a hand drill. In order to be safe for use, the grounding rod that I used had to be hit 3 feet into the ground. The spark gap was made by having a small space between 2 screws. Here the primary and secondary coil have been put in place. The copper wire from the secondary coil exits the wood and is wrapped around this handle where it then goes to the ground. The transformer was plugged into a wall outlet. This is how the saltwater Leyden jars look like during the experiment. I used heavy-duty jumper cables for a lot of the connections in my Tesla coil. When the Tesla coil went through troubleshooting, there were only 2 things that went wrong. The transformer did not work, which I solved by buying another one, and the spark gap was too wide for the Tesla coil to run consistently, so all I had to do there was lessen the gap. With the Tesla coil fully operational, I began my experiment. Over the next month, I irradiated 1 culture of flies in 30-minute intervals, totaling 10 hours of time in close proximity to the spark gap, and therefore radiation. A control culture was kept side by side with the irradiated culture during storage, but during the radiation sessions it stayed with me, away from the Tesla coil. During the experiment, there were only minor behavioral differences, which could easily have been caused by the noise-related trauma from the spark gap. After the experiment ended, I let the cultures sit over spring break. When I came back, I noted something very interesting, because the difference between the 2 cultures was not there previously. The irradiated culture had turned more brown. I described it as having aged faster by about a week, based on what it had looked like. The control culture was starting to look like the irradiated culture a week and a half after that observation I had made. About a week and a half after I noticed that change, I began to collect my last set of data, the morphological changes. To the naked eye, the flies seemed to be the same, but under a 21x microscope, I noticed something interesting. While both cultures were bought as flightless fruit flies, which means they can't fly, which was caused by deformed wings, the wings from the flies in the irradiated culture were about half deformed and half normal, whereas the wings from the control culture were more than 75% deformed. Also, there were almost no larvae in the irradiated culture, but the control culture had a sizable population of larvae along the sides, that were still growing. In conclusion, upon examination of my data, I have determined that there is a sizable risk involved in prolonged exposure to a Tesla coil, even if it is a small one made at home, and I would advise anyone thinking of making one to take precautions to avoid both the high voltage and radiation. Precautions I recommend taking to avoid these dangers are to 1. Remotely turn on your Tesla coil using your room breaker, ensuring that you won't be electrocuted during startup. 2. Keep a fair distance away to reduce the chances of radiation reaching you. 3. Remove all metal from your person so that a rogue spark doesn't arc at you. 4. Build or buy an X-ray blocking device if you intend to run it for an extended period of time. 5. Connect the spark gaps with a piece of conductive metal while wearing rubber gloves to ensure the Tesla coil is not holding a residual charge after you turn it off. And 6. Check all components of your Tesla coil regularly and replace them if they are being worn out.